Welcome to PhD&D. Welcome to the topic of perception checks. I've talked about these before. I know other people have done videos on them before, but I had some new thoughts on it, so I thought I'd broadcast that to the community and see where you guys stand with it. And with perception checks, they happen too often. You walk into a room, first thing anyone wants to do is make a perception check. I know recently Andrew at Dawnforge Cast has talked about this in some videos. I didn't get to go as in detail as I wanted at the GM's table because I had to cut out early, so I apologize for that. But they happen too often. People jump to them. That's metagaming to me. You're thinking about it as a game if you say, I want to make a perception check. If it's a new player, obviously allow a little barrier, a little time to get away from that, and explain why you'd prefer that they say other things. Like, okay, instead of a perception check, I always tell my players, you have to tell me what you're doing. And as a DM or GM, I will tell you what type of check to make if you need to make one at all. So these players, they need to say something like, okay, instead of I want to make a perception check, see if there's any trapdoors. That's a common statement. Something else, which could be a little bit better, is, okay, we're in a room. All right, I am going to follow my hand along the right wall and see if at any point in this wall I can tell that there's a difference. If a wall was added at some point, I want to see if there's a spot that stands out to me that something's just a little off. Something like that. Or it can be as simple as you take a dungeon room, for example, and you tell them, there's a square room, basically. It's about 15 feet by 15 feet, made of stone, smells wet, damp. There's a door on the other side. They're either going to go straight to that door or make perception checks. And here's my thought, that lies the fault of the GM, not the players. They want to engage it more. They want to do something in this room. They don't just want to bypass it. So, if they're going straight to perception checks, is it not the fault of the GM to give them more to work with? If you give them a blank canvas, how can they tell you what they want to do with it? The example I gave, running your hand along the wall, that takes some creativity, and they can do that. But, okay, and here, let me flesh this out with a better example. Okay, take that same room, now put some barrels in it. You walk into a dungeon room, it's 15 feet by 15 feet. There's a wooden door on the other side, but lining the left and right wall are barrels. The room smells of rotten fish, and there seems to be some strange goo at the bottom of these barrels leaking out. Okay, as a player, what can you do now? Well, you can search behind the barrels. The obvious answer is open a barrel. And rarely would a person say, in my experience, I'd like to make a perception check to see what's inside the barrels. If they're saying that, teach them to get away from that and say, you just open the barrel, see what you find. Something like that doesn't require a roll. You don't need to roll for every single little detail you do in a game. If they want to open a barrel and look inside, let them do it. But you just gave them another option. In more detail with your setting or where they're at, you've given them more to do with that setting. So I think the perception check problem, if you will, is a lack of options for characters in certain places. And the same can go when you go too far. If you give a character a giant room with bookshelves, 50 feet high. This room is 100 feet long. There's bookshelves, desks. There's barrels in one spot. There's crates in another, just loaded with stuff. That's fantastic. But now you're almost overwhelming a player. And as a player, I would almost feel like, oh, geez, I don't want to take the time to go through everything in this room. Perception check, and I don't want to do that, but that's a thought that comes to mind. So you can't go too far with it. Too much description, too many things to do, and they're going to try to use a perception check to narrow in their focus on something. So I hope this makes sense. There's a little ranting going on, but at one end of the spectrum, you don't give them enough to do or enough to interact with, and they're going to go to perception checks by default. If you give them too much to do on the other end and there's just way too many options, they're going to use that perception check to try to focus in and become a little bit more economical or more efficient with their time there. Now, some players may love to search through a giant room piece by piece, but what I'm talking about is just giving them a room that they can walk into with different things that they can interact with. You know, put the room, put a brazier in a room hanging, put some torches, put an altar in a room. Like I've said, chests, barrels, crates, whatever you need. Put a throne in the room. At least give them some stuff to examine. And try again not to let them make perception checks. Just say, okay, you wanted to make a perception check on the throne. Well, let's get away from that. Tell me, what exactly are you looking for on this throne, or what are you trying to stand out? And you can lead them along. But the point of this video, after all that, is that I think you're either not giving them enough or you're giving them too much, if that's happening a lot. And I certainly know in my games it has. And today was the first time I ever thought of this. A simple fix is, just give them something to interact with. More often than not, I think that's it. You give them a room, and if you put one thing in the room, that's not a lot to interact with. Give them some descriptions, some smells to get them thinking. Give them sights, obviously, to get them thinking. Or maybe they're in a room with a dead end, and there's not a lot in the room, but they hear something. They can hear something on the other side of the wall. Okay, now they're going to start looking. There's got to be some way to get on the other side of this wall. Engage the senses and just give them options. Give them something to interact with. Give them something to do, and I think you're going to see that perception check problem start to fade into the background the more you can engage this and the more you can do it. So that's my thoughts. What's everybody else's thoughts on the topic? Do you think that by giving someone more to do that can help? Do you think there's a point of giving them too much, that they kind of revert back to the perception check problem? So those are my thoughts. Love to hear what everybody thinks. Thanks for watching.